Apologies for being late to start with. I decided I needed to bring a projector with me, but it's our prayer meeting, so they needed the projector. So we ended up having to send one of the children to Tyndale and ask them could I borrow theirs. But if I'd rung Mr. McDowell, he could have told me there's one here, and I didn't need to do that. So that's apologies for being late for that. I'm just going to plug in some power here in case I run out. But yes, for my sins, I ended up not only being on the committee, but ended up chairing the Charity Registration Committee in Presbytery. And that really came out of a visit that I went, myself and the Reverend Robert Omerod, before he passed away, went to meet the Charity Commission. I was there on behalf of the schools, and the Reverend Omerod was there on behalf of the wider Presbytery and Government Morals Committee. So really out of that then there was a committee that was set up and sought to process this. So what I envisage to do tonight is just a little bit of a presentation about charity stuff in general. You might have your fears and concerns, and that's understandable. What are we doing in this? When you think about the Lord's work and what we could be doing, why do we have to give attention to this and sort it out and satisfy the powers that be in the country at the present time? So I want to go through a little bit of an explanation. So if you have any fears and concerns about it, I hope hopefully that will allay it. If you have questions, I'll do my best to answer them. If I can't get you an answer, I will go away and ask someone else, and I'll send you the answer back through Mr. McDowell. So I'll do my best, and hopefully what we cover, I've prepared this for others as well, and I've gone over it there last weekend as well, and refreshed my own memory on it, and we'll work our way through it. Everything has been delayed and even paused because of COVID. We were to have this up and running just prior to, I suppose, the COVID pandemic starting, and then, it was passed in the Presbytery, but we told the Charity Commission that because of COVID and the inability of our churches to meet in a proper fashion, that we would not be processing anything more and progressing toward registration until this was over. In fact, we said 3 months after we're back to normality. So you wouldn't say we're back to normality yet. So it's 3 months, whatever day normality kicks in, if ever. So that may be a good way never to have to register at all, is to tell them, well, we're not back to normality yet, and you did agree to the 3 months. So anyway, we'll say a little bit about that as we go along. So I suppose the best thing, if you keep your questions to the end, and when we've gone through this and said a little bit about the Constitution, then if you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them. Each local Free Presbyterian congregation also exists as a charity. You mightn't have been aware of that before now, but that has been the case ever since we came into existence. I'm going back to not just the beginning of Bushmills or Newton Abbey, I'm going back to the beginning of the Presbytery. A trust deed was drawn up and trustees appointed to hold property owned by the local congregation in trust for the communicant members. And that's very important at that particular point. On the very first Presbytery was held in December 1951, and here is one of the first, item 10 of the first Presbytery says, property and trust deeds, all Free Presbyterian buildings and property to be under the control of local trustees, that all trust deeds be held locally and all property be held as Free Presbyterian property. That's 1951. So it's not something new that's only come up in the last few years. This is something that has been in existence and affected the Presbytery and the denomination since our inception. The June 1988 minute of Presbytery, it was decided that the Finance Committee should be recognised as the Board of Trustees for all Presbytery property, so that a proper trust deed can be drawn up and proper recognition as a charity be afforded to the Presbytery. And the reason why that minute appears is that in 1986 there was a new Charity Act came into existence. There was one previously in 1964. There was one was already in existence back in 1951. In fact, charity law has been in existence for over 300 years in the United Kingdom and the various component parts of the United Kingdom. But in 1986 there was another Charity Act, so the Presbytery has addressed this from time to time, just maybe not now in the fashion that we have to do it at present, but in the past, historically, the Presbytery has addressed this, and where there were issues that had to be dealt with, the Presbytery dealt with it. The only thing now, it extends a little bit more. So we've mentioned there the first two of those points. The third one, once a trust deed was set up in this fashion, an organisation such as a church would be deemed to be for public benefit and was assumed to be a charity. And I would underscore that word assumed, because that's important in what is happening at the present time. The local church did not need to formally apply to be recognised as a charity. This is now going to change. And really what is changing is no longer is it assumed that a church or religious body generally is a charity. You're going to have to prove it. That's really the basic change. And that's what is driving everything that has to be done with regards to charity registration. The government has taken away the assumption that a religious organisation was a charity. For hundreds of years, that's how it operated. From charity law first came in right up until 2008, that's how it was for every religious body. If you engaged in religious activity at all, no matter what church you were automatically assumed that you were a charity. No longer allowed to do that. That first started in England and Scotland. England and Wales are together. Scotland are on their own. Eventually it has come over to Northern Ireland. I remember, I've been in the Presbytery now over 20 years, and I remember Dr. Paisley saying many years ago when I first went to the Presbytery that this was coming down the line because it had already started in England. And he said then in the Presbytery that the driver for this is money laundering through charities in England. And he highlighted the fact that some of them were Islamic charities, funding terrorism abroad. And he said this has all been driven by the abuse of money in fronts, charity that are set up just for a front. And he said this will eventually come to Northern Ireland. And that's true. It has come to Northern Ireland. Now, very quickly, a few benefits for being recognised as a charity. Is this just something that we have to acquiesce to, or is there a benefit in the church also being a charity? Well, first of all, it safeguards church assets. The trust deed is worded to safeguard the purpose of the church as an organisation so that no one can exercise or can gain or exercise control over the organisation or could act contrary to the trust deed. So there's a benefit. Never mind, we'll come to the financial benefits in a moment. There's other benefits as to how property is held. Property can be owned outright. If you own your own home, you own it outright. But that's not how the church is owned. The church is not owned outright by the people who are the trustees of this church. Because if they could, it's their asset and they could do with it as they pleased. And they could pass it on to their heirs and successors as they please. If it was held outright as you would own your own home, that is not how church property is held. But in order to hold it differently, it's held in trust for the members by whoever names are on the trust deed. They are holding it in trust for the members of the church so that it belongs to the members. And in order to do that, you have to set up as a trust, have a trust deed, and you're into the realm of charity law. Upon the death of a trustee, the church's assets pass to the surviving trustees, irrespective of any provision to the contrary in the deceased's will. With new trustees added, this enables the church to carry on in its purpose. So nobody can take the church away from its members, physically, as to the property. Then there are financial exemptions. Churches have historically been exempt from paying corporation income tax and profits in the course of charitable activity, property business rates, stamp duty on property purchase, capital gains tax on the sale of assets, VAT on certain goods and services, building fees to planning authorities and building control, either exempted entirely or a reduced rate. And then also legacies given to charities being free of inheritance tax. And I suppose the last one is the one that you might be more familiar with, gift aid relief on donations from individuals. I presume maybe you're on a gift aid scheme here in this congregation, and if you're in the gift aid scheme, then the church benefits because it is a charity. But that's only one of 8 benefits, financial benefits, that come to a church that is recognised also as a charity. Why are these new documents now necessary? Well, there was a new Charity Act. There have been previous Charity Acts in 1964, 1987, which have influenced the Free Presbyterian Church as a whole. The latest Northern Ireland Charity Act came into existence in 2008. This new Charity Act now governs charity law in Northern Ireland. A regulator has been established to oversee the implementation of the provisions within this Charity Act. Before, it was the courts. If there was a dispute that was going to involve charity law, you had to go to court. But that's a very expensive process. So the government set up a regulator to regulate charities and to oversee charities, and also to iron out some of the difficulties that they have. There's powers that the regulator has. There's a regulator in England and Wales, there's a regulator in Scotland, and there's a regulator set up in Northern Ireland, the Charity Commission in here in Northern Ireland. They're based down in Lurgan. If you go off the motorway there at the Lurgan turnoff and you go in, and there's a filling station, and was it Friar Tuck's or something? There's a cafe or something. Well, up above it, you'll see on the wall, Charity Commission Northern Ireland. That's where they're based, and we have been there on a number of occasions having meetings with them about certain matters. Back to this matter about the assumption. The assumption that churches exist for the public benefit has been removed. The new Charity Act no longer assumes that religious bodies or charities are existing for the public benefit. This is due to the abuse of the system. Each organisation that engages in charitable activity must seek registration with the Charity Commission. Well, that should have been off Northern Ireland. Each organisation that desires to be recognised as a charity must prove, and I mean that, you must prove that you now exist for the public benefit. And we'll come, that's one of the documents that you have received from what I've heard there from Mr. McDowell. You received the Constitution, and then you've received a public benefit statement and what the charity does. And we'll come to talk about those in a moment. But those are for the purpose of proving that the church is for the public benefit. And we are required to do that by the law. There's also the opportunity to attain religious designated status. There is the facility within the Charities Act for religious bodies to attain religious designated status. Well, what is it? Well, where an internal governing structure already exists within a religious body, which exercises a general oversight over component parts of that religious body, then a religious body can be exempt from certain sections of the Charity Act 2008, namely sections 33 to 36 and also 86 of the Charities Act 2008. So we reckon that would be a good thing, if we can be exempt from it as much as possible. We recognise our responsibility to obey the law unless it contravenes a principle of Scripture. And all along we have asked ourselves that question in our committee. Does any of this contravene a principle of Scripture? And if it doesn't, well then the Scripture binds us that we obey the law of the land, and also there is a rule in the presbytery that we obey the civil law unless it contravenes a principle of Scripture. So unless we can come up with a principle of Scripture that says this principle is broken and this particular part of the Charity Act goes against the Scripture, then we have no grounds for saying, oh, we're not going to pursue this. We're the last of the denominations, really, in Northern Ireland to seek registration. If you go onto the Charity Commission site for Northern Ireland tonight and type in churches, you'll find every type of church. Presbyterian Church, Church of Ireland, Evangelical Presbyterian, Reformed Presbyterian, Roman Catholic, Church of Ireland, name them, Elam, Baptist, whatever you want to name, you'll find them there. You'll not find a Free Presbyterian registered yet. We are the last of the churches to register. We want to do it as a group registration. We want common documents because we want this religious designated status. If I told you that there's only one other church that wants the religious designated status in all of Northern Ireland, apart from the Free Presbyterian Church, only one other denomination. All the other denominations are happy to subject themselves to all of the Charity Act. It's only ourselves and one other denomination that is seeking to get exemption from it as much as possible. And the Presbytery decided that we do indeed want to be exempt from it as much as possible. We want to be as free from any oversight by the secular power as we possibly can. You can't live in this world and be exempt, be utterly free from oversight from the civil power. Not possible. Not when you start to own property and hold a bank account. I know sometimes, I said this to somebody else recently, I know that we say, oh, we're a New Testament church. Well, only so far. Because the day we started owning property and having bank accounts, we ceased being a real New Testament church. Because you don't find the New Testament church in the Acts having property. They met in people's homes. There was a house church in Colossae. And in the epistle to the Colossians and in the epistle to Philemon, you'll find mention made of the people meeting in people's homes. The church in thy house is what Paul said to Philemon. The church in thy house. The church met in people's homes. But we don't do that now. We come into buildings. We take ownership of buildings. We build buildings. Or we buy them. So once we start doing that, we have moved outside to some degree the New Testament pattern. So yes, we can say there's certain things we want to be following in the New Testament pattern, and rightly so. But in all honesty, we have to also admit there's other things that we don't. And here's one of them. Once you start to own property and hold property, once you start to have bank accounts, you're into the realm of civil law. And you're under the oversight, just like all the other organisations that there are out there in the world. So we try to minimise that as much as possible. We're under it for, building control, rates, whatever else. We get exemption from rates. Part of that's been a charity, but there's health and safety law that we have to take account for as well in the church. There's a number of other things where the civil power intrudes into the church, into the physical nature of the church, not into the spiritual nature, but into the physical nature of the church. And as I say, whether it's building control, when you go to start a building project, we're thinking to do a bit of an extension, and we're already talking to the architect, and he's telling us, well, you have to do this and have to do that. I was just talking to one of the other ministers, and they're thinking about replacing their church, and he was telling me that the architect told them, you need an ecological survey done. And if they find bats in your building, you'll not get knocking your building down. That's the law. You can argue about that all till the cows come home. But if you go to knock down your building and you have to, by law, you have to do an ecological survey of your building, and they come along and they find one bat living in your roof space, you can't knock your building down. That's the law of the land. No matter how much you want to knock it down to improve the Lord's work and advance it, doesn't happen. So what we're trying to do is acknowledge that this exists, and yes, we're going to have to take note of it and live under it, but we want to be as free of it as possible. So that's why we are indeed going to pursue religious designated status and seek to be exempt from these sections of the Charity Act. I'm not going to read through all of that, but that's what is on the Charity Commission website about religious designated status. I have underlined just two words there, component elements. It will be the presbytery that gains religious designated status. And then everybody under the presbytery, so whether it's congregations, whether it's the mission board, whether it's the mainland commission looking after the churches in the mainland, whether it's the Christian schools, whatever the body, Let the Bible Speak, Missionary Council, whatever the body is underneath the presbytery will all then be able to come in underneath the presbytery, and because it is a component element of the presbytery, every individual charity under the Free Presbyterian banner will benefit then from this exemption. So they don't give it out to every individual congregation and every individual body that has to register. All of those individual bodies that I've mentioned have to register. Individual congregations have to register. The mission board's going to be registering. The missionary council will be registering. The Whitfield College will be registering. Let the Bible Speak will be registering. Some of the schools will be registering. All of them have to register. But religious designated status is given to the presbytery. And then everything that's under the oversight of the presbytery, because that's what is required. You have to have an oversight body, and because that oversight body already exists, then the Charity Commission says, well, we'll remove our powers of oversight to some degree, because you already have an oversight of these charities. Now, Northern Ireland is the only place that has that. England and Scotland doesn't have that. So any of our churches that have to register with the English and Welsh, the English and Wales Charity Commission will not benefit from religious designated status. It's in a limited fashion in Scotland, but it's based upon numbers. And I think the last time I checked, if I remember right, it's a couple of years ago now actually, but I think it was 100,000 members. So the Free Presbyterian Church is not going to reach 100,000 members in Scotland. That's only going to take in the Church of Scotland as far as I know. And the Church of Scotland, as you know, is established. So they have certain rights anyway. And I don't know whether that was tailored. I don't know Scottish charity law very much. So I don't know why it was tailored in the fashion that it was. It may well be because they wanted to carve out a niche for the established church in Scotland. So the church in Gardenstown, the church in Rutherglen are already registered. And they won't benefit from this. They're under the whole Charity Act over there, because there's no facility. And the same will apply down south as well, the congregations over the border. Again, no facility for religious designated status. This only is applicable to Northern Ireland. It is something that was carved out here for Northern Ireland. I think, I'm not 100% sure, I think it was done by those that were in positions of authority. It was done up at Stormont. But part of the carve-out was for the Roman Catholic Church. But then the Roman Catholic Church did not apply for it. They're registered. But they fell foul of another rule. And fair play to the Charity Commission. I'll give it to them. They stood up to them and told them, we're not registering you in the way you want. We're registering you this way because you break some of the rules here. And they didn't lie down and let them walk all over them. They stood up to them. And as I say, more credit to them for doing that, for that probably wasn't what people were expecting. Let's come on to registration documents. The presbytery decided to compile tailor-made documents for the purpose of charity registration. There are certain elements that each charity needs to demonstrate they have as part of their governance structure to achieve registration. For example, a governing structure that includes rules for governance, conflicts of interest, a mechanism for amendment, severance and dissolution. Now, all of those are very important. We might say, well, where do they come into the Lord's work? Well, maybe not obvious at all. Maybe they'll never be needed. I would suggest the second of those, particularly conflicts of interest. The Charity Commission come down very hard on that, where somebody has a conflict of interest and they're part of a decision-making process. You can't be part of a decision-making process if you're conflicted by the issue that is being discussed. I'll give you an example that come up in one of the other churches. So I'm not talking about Bushmills, so I don't know your situation, but I know this happened because I was talking about it, or somebody talked to me about it, so I'm aware that it happened. A church committee wants to employ somebody to cut their grass, but the person that they want to employ is an elder son, runs a gardening business, and round the country has a business, cuts other people's grass, and the church says, well, why can we not get him? You can, but that elder can't be part of the decision. He's conflicted. It's his son, and therefore, in the eyes of the law, he's conflicted, because he's in on a decision that involves a family member. And the law actually states who you are conflicted by through your family connections. And it lists them. And your son or your daughter is one of them. There's others as well. But that's just one example where conflicts of interest come in, very obviously come in. There's a whole lot of others as well, but there's just one example. And that's the type of thing the Charity Commission are interested in. I'll come in a moment to. They're not interested in what we believe, not yet anyway, thankfully. Not interested in what you believe as a church or what we practice, what we preach in the pulpit. They're not interested in that. And may that continue. And we certainly need to pray that that would continue. What they are interested in is how we make our decisions. That they're fair and open and transparent and free from conflicts of interest. That's what they're interested in with charities. And that's what they will come down on. And we were speaking to a solicitor last Thursday about property trust deeds. That's the next stage of this. And she was telling us that the Charity Commission are on the lookout for test cases. They want to establish their authority. And if you've been following anything about charity law in Northern Ireland, you'll know that they've got a bit of a hammering in the court. And they've lost a few cases. And they've had to go back and start again. And a whole lot of charities that they had registered have to be re-registered because they did it wrong. But that has come out because that was challenged in court. And they're looking for cases to establish their authority in Northern Ireland over charities. So, as I said to one brother, we need to be careful that we don't give them one by doing something we ought not to be doing. I would suggest that's a good principle, never mind the Charity Commission, that if you're conflicted in a decision, that you step aside and say, I can't be part of this decision-making process. A minister has to do that at times. I'll give you an obvious example as a minister. When your children come to seek communicant membership in the church in which you're a minister, what do? Well, when my children came to the session and said we would like to be community members, I said to the elders, I can't be in this meeting. The clerk of session will have to chair it, and I'm leaving. And they knew the form that we follow when we interview somebody for communicant membership, and they carried it through. And I told them that. I said, no, give them no favours. Don't treat them any differently because they're my children. They have to be treated the same. And that's just one example where a minister is conflicted and that he has to step aside because it's his family. So I would suggest that that's a good principle. Never mind the charity law. Never mind what's required in that aspect. That's just a good practice that ought to be followed anyway in issues like this. So there's certain things that we need. Who are the members of the charity and how do new members join? You have to state that clearly. Who are the governing trustees of the charity? How are these governing trustees appointed and, if necessary, removed? So what is the governance structure that we're following? Well, first of all, let's start from the bottom up. Membership of the church or the charity. The members of the church or the charity will be all communicant members of each local congregation. So there's a communicant membership that already exists. They will be the members. That hasn't really changed. That is how it has been before now. As you know, when there's not so much maybe elders being chosen because that's more the church oversight, but let's say you had to choose new trustees. And over the years, churches have had to change their trustees. Men who maybe have been there at the beginning passed away. Sadly, sometimes men leave churches and move on for one reason or another. So there's a need to replace them and put on new trustees. Well, how do you elect those? You have a congregational meeting. You bring together your communicant members, just the same way as if you were coming together to elect elders or choose a minister or whatever. Same process. So nothing's going to change in that. Governing trustees of the charity. Well, this is going to change a little bit. And we're going to try to regulate this a little bit more ourselves. These will be all active members of the Kirk session, including the minister, for the simple reason that the Kirk session has the ultimate authority over a church. They're responsible for it all. We have a committee. We delegate certain responsibilities to the committee in finance, property, and material and practical things. That's very true. But ultimately, it is the elders of the church, the session of the church, that has ultimate responsibility. That's who law says your trustees are. whoever has ultimate responsibility. And as in Presbyterianism, it's the session. Well, we say, well, surely then that's just the obvious point. The session are going to be the governing trustees of a charity. And that term, you can pick up on it, governing trustee. Because not only are they an elder in the church, or either a teaching elder, ruling elder, they're going to be a governing trustee as well in law. Now, the last point I have there is this will avoid the need to duplicate meetings, and we're trying to cut down administration as well. But we've had trustees up until now, because thankfully I'm not aware that it has happened anywhere in our church. But say there was an issue in any of our congregations and the law got involved. Long before this, go back 20 years, the law got involved in something. And that church got taken to court. Who do you think is going to appear in court? It's the trustees. It's not the elders. It's not the committee, going back 20 years. The prosecution service will find out who's the trustees of that property, that church. They're the people that we will sue. They're the people we'll put in the dock. Saying it's a health and safety issue that somebody was being taken up on. That's who's going to be in the dock. Not the elders, not the committee. Who are the trustees of the property and the church? And we have had trustees ever since a congregation started. There's trustees. There's trustees here in Bushmills. There's trustees in Newtonabbey and all the other congregations. They have been there since day one. And we have been in existence in Newtonabbey since 1953. There's been trustees from day one. Now, sometimes they were elders, sometimes they were committee men, sometimes they weren't even committee men or elders. When the work started, there mightn't even have been a session in committee just at the beginning, and they wanted to put property into somebody's name, and they said, well, here, would you be willing to throw your weight in with this work and put your name on the trust deed? And they put their name on the trust deed. Maybe they didn't know all the consequences of it. But there's always been trustees. All we're doing now is trying to regulate this a little bit better and say, well, all the elders are in this together, minister included. They're the ones who have final oversight, final responsibility. They may delegate financial matters, but ultimately it's the session, minister and elders that's responsible. So we have said in the document, we've told it to the Charity Commission, our governing trustees will be the session of each church, whoever that session may be. If in the case, as it has been with myself, I've been intermoderator in Tyndale, that's finishing Friday night, with Mr. Nelson taking up the work there. But we have a small session, there's 2 elders, and you're down to 2 elders and myself. Well, if Tyndale had been called forward to register before they got their own minister, I would have been a trustee of Tyndale as well as Newtonabbey. The intermoderator in a church, a small church, will also be a trustee with the elders of that congregation, whoever they may be. So we're trying to, as I say, regulate it and regulise it as well. What is the responsibility of governing trustees? Well, formally, they have to sign off the annual financial statement of accounts prepared by the church committee. 2, formally sign off the scrutiny of accounts as required in charity law. Prepare and submit to the Charity Commission a trustee's annual report. 4, prepare and submit to the Charity Commission an annual monitoring return. So those are the 4 things that trustees are legally responsible to do year on year. If you have questions about some of this, then you can ask me at the end. The new position of an elder emeritus. Charity law requires governing trustees to be actively involved in the governance of the local church. There are a number of elders who, because of age or ill health, no longer take an active part in the governance of the church and therefore can't be governing trustees. A new position has therefore been created by Presbytery to safeguard and honour these men who have given sterling service to the Lord's work over many years. those who have this conferred on them, this honour of being an elder emeritus, they can still continue as property holding trustees. They can still serve at the Lord's table as elders. They can be stewards in the house of the Lord, lifting the offering, seeing people to their seats, doing the normal duties that they would do. The only thing that they will not be doing is that it's in here in the blue text. The wording respecting this new position will read, Elder Emeritus means an elder who, because of age or ill health, no longer takes an active part in the governance of the church, nor is counted as part of the quorum for meetings of the kirk session or committee, but is still honoured for his years of service in the eldership of the church. And there are a number of our churches, in fact, Newton Abbey is one where we have a senior elder who doesn't attend session committee meetings just because of age and health. But we honour him as an elder. He sits at the Lord's table. He serves at the Lord's table. If on the few occasions we've had photographs of our session, he's in the photograph as an elder. But he will not now be counted in as part of the quorum for a session meeting. And that's to protect him. Because going back to the point where trustees have to be active. You can't have passive trustees. You can't have somebody who's just a trustee in name only and doesn't do the work, doesn't take responsibility for what they are. That cannot happen. So we want to protect these brethren who, as we've said, have given sterling service to our denomination. And we're just following on behind many of them who have, some of them gone on to glory, some of them are still in our church. Maybe some of them don't even come out to church. I know churches that have elders, maybe they're in a nursing home or in their own home, but they're not able to come out physically on a Lord's Day or to the prayer meeting. Well, they're still elders and they deserve to be recognised as elders because we recognise ordination for life. We recognise ordination for life unless there's a reason to discipline somebody and remove that ordination. There's no grounds, and we're not. And we talked to the Charity Commission and we said this is an issue and we want to deal with it, and here's how we propose to deal with it and why we want to deal with it. And they said we're perfectly happy with that. We can see where you're coming from that, and we'll accept that as long as you write it into your documentation, and you'll find reference to it in the Constitution. The need for congregations to adopt these new documents. In order for the congregations to benefit from religious designated status, there needs to be a common constitution used by all the individual congregations. It is the presbytery who will register and then seek RDS. Once this has been achieved, then the congregations and all the presbytery bodies, which are charities in their own right, will benefit. This is the component charities part I've already mentioned. The presbytery having achieved RDS, then the congregations will be called forward to register. And we have said that we will not go forward to register until we have got this. And if you're not going to give it to us, then we will go back and report it to the presbytery, and the presbytery can decide what they want to do. So that has to happen first. Having an agreed common document with the Charity Commission which satisfies all points of charity law, this will be available from a drop-down box as part of the online registration process. The communicant members of each congregation need to adopt the documents. This is a mark of their ability to be classed as a charity in their own right. A lack of ability to do this would mean that the local congregations are not sufficiently distinct and separate from the presbytery to be classed as a charity in their own right. This is what happened with Roman Catholic chapels. I said a moment ago that the Charity Commission wouldn't register them the way they wanted. And here's the reason why. They wouldn't register them because they did not meet the institution test, which requires them, the local chapel, to have direction and control over governance and resources. The Charity Commission in Northern Ireland deemed them to be too much under the control and governance of the diocese, the bishopate in other words. Therefore, the Roman Catholic Church is only registered with the Charity Commission at diocese level. So if you go onto the Charity Commission website, look up a Roman Catholic Church, there's only a few of them because they're only registered at diocese level, bishop level. And the Charity Commission stood up to them and said, you will not be allowed to register chapel level because you don't have sufficient independence. You're under the bishop, the control of the bishop too much. So we need to be careful we don't fall foul of that law as well. If there was a case where a local church refused to adopt the documents provided by the presbytery, then that local congregation would still have to seek registration and provide the Charity Commission with a set of documents. So it's not a way out to say, well, here, we'll vote this down and not adopt these, and we'll be able to sail on the way we've been going. No, you won't. You'll be taken to court. And the Charity Commission said that we will take you to court. The law of the land says you have to seek registration. You mightn't get it unless you have certain things that the charity law says you need, and that you prove that you've met the institution test. Then you'll get it. So you have to see. That's how it is framed, that if you engage in charitable activity, you must seek registration. That's how the law is framed. It doesn't say that a charity has to register, because that's assuming that you are a charity. And that's what you have to set out to prove, remember what I said at the beginning. That's no longer assumed. So it is framed in that way. The wording actually is that if you engage in charitable activity, and they list charitable activity, the advancement of religion is one of them, which is what we fall into, you must seek registration. That's the law of the land. And then they'll determine whether they give it to you if you meet certain criteria. And as I say, we have been through this, and as I say, we have worked our way through it. We have gone and met them, talked to them, told them difficulties that we foresee. We have ironed out those difficulties. And honestly, we have to say, at no time have they ever hindered us from being faithful to what we believe in, not only what we teach and preach, because that isn't any of their concern, but even principles of Presbyterian government. We have highlighted some of these things, and they said, we're happy to work with you. If you show us a way of working around this and through it, we're happy to go with it, and then you can put it into your documents. And sometimes I was pleasantly surprised, because one of the fellas that has been dealing with us is a man called Connor Kearney. And you know by that name, he didn't get it in an Orange Lodge. He got it in a Turf Lodge. But he said to me one day, when I was talking to him on the phone, he says, your church is very democratic in how you go about decision making. I was thinking, well, it is. I'm glad you see it compared to popery. That it's a bit different. But that's what he said to me on the phone. He says, your church is somewhat different in how democratic it is in its decisions. So even in going through these documentations, he noticed the difference. And as I say, we have had difficulties, and we've ironed them out. I've already mentioned those sections, so we'll keep on moving. Does this mean that the Charity Commission will be interfering in or influencing what we preach and contend for as a church? Well, the Charity Commission is on record as acknowledging it has no jurisdiction over religious belief, faith or practice issues in any church. In writing to another evangelical body, the Charity Commission has stated, and this is a scan of the letter, intersection between charity law and religion. The faith and practices of religious charities are not matters for the Commission to address or over which it exercises control. The Church's interpretation of Scripture is a matter for that particular church, and the Commission has no jurisdiction to adjudicate on the tenets of religious belief, faith or practice. This principle is set out in the Commission's Advancement of Religion supporting document, a copy of which is enclosed. And then it also mentions the religious designated status that you can attain, and as I've said, we're going to pursue that. Here's what they said to us in a letter. Just January 2020. Frances McCandless, Chief Executive of the Charity Commission NI, sent me this letter, and she said in it, the faith and practices of churches are not matters for the Commission to address or over which it exercises control. A church's interpretation of Scripture is a matter for that particular church, and the Commission has no jurisdiction to adjudicate on the tenets of religious belief, faith or practice. What they are interested in is how you govern yourself. That's what they're interested in. And that's why I've been highlighting some of those things. Okay, that brings us then to these documents. And there's three of them. I mentioned them earlier, the Constitution, the Public Benefit Statement, and then there's a shorter one that is what does the church do? So if I can just change screens. So according to Mr. McDowell, everybody's got a copy of this. So we don't need to spend very much time at it. Let's see if I can increase that a little bit. Right, we'll just do that and move it up and down so that you can read it. Is that big enough text? No? you want to go? Right. Well, you've had a copy, so it's not as if you're seeing this for the first time. So I want to move through this as quickly as possible. So there's that's the problem when you enlarge it so much. We end up. Right, sorry, going to have to go with that. 23 sections in it, running through different parts. And some of this I've already highlighted. Some of it is in our book of order. In fact, I'll say this about this. Our committee set out with the purpose that we want to make as few changes, if any changes, to the book of order that already exists. And we managed to do this without making any changes to the book of order. Now, we've had to add a few things in, like Elder Emeritus and so on that I mentioned, but I can say to you that we did not have to take out anything out of our book of order. There's a book of order that the Presbytery has drawn up for how the Presbytery runs and how the church is run, and the elders can access it and so on, and we did not have to take anything out of that in order to get this agreed with the Charity Commission. As I say, a couple of things we did have to add to it just to tidy things up and so on, but there is nothing that we had to take out. I'm not going to go down through every individual section. If there's somebody has a particular question, if you've already saw it and read it, well then you might have something that you want to ask. Our articles of faith are there, and a little introduction of what the Free Church is all about, and then there's an interpretation section as to what each word means, so there's no doubt about it. Our objective, verse 4, there you are, going back to preaching mode. Section 4. The objective is to promote the advancement of religion. And here's an example where the Charity Commission helped us. Because see all what we have in Section 5, all those powers, we had that in Section 4. And one of the people in the Charity Commission said to us, do you want a bit of advice? Get them out of that and put them into your powers, because you'll have to report on every one of those. If you keep those in Section 4, you will have to write a report on every individual clause, and you'll see all of those statements that we have tried to encompass. Everything that our denomination does and that our congregation does is in those statements. And they said to us, now they could have sat quiet and said, well, here, we'll give those Free Presbyterians a bit of work, we'll keep them busy. But they didn't. Fair play to them. And again, as I say, I was pleasantly surprised many a times in our dealing, because that was not how I was going to expect, and I thought they would be just only too glad to have a go at us on something. But they said, look, get them out, just put in that one line that you have there in objective, that you're promoting the advancement of religion and you're doing it subject to your doctrinal statements. That's all you have to report on. That's all. And that's a lot simpler than going through every one of those clauses, 1 to 11, there in section 5.1. So hopefully all of that is self-explanatory, I think. Let me just scroll down here, and if there's something I want to say. No, there's nothing that comes to mind there, that unless somebody has got a... And then there is this... This is the public benefit statement. I said at the beginning that you have to prove now that you are for the public benefit, that you are a charity. And there are certain clauses that you have to take and start your sentence with. And you'll see there, for example, in that... Is my cursor? Yeah, where my cursor is. The benefits which flow from its purpose include. So that's the words that you have to start a paragraph with. And the same, the benefits are further demonstrated. The purpose does not lend to harm. There's certain statements that you have to prove that you're for the public benefit by completing these paragraphs. And that's what that is about. Now, we have drawn this all up and talked to the Charity Commission a number of times and got their say-so, and the Presbytery has passed it and adopted it. So it's all good to go. It's just a matter of waiting. Each individual church has to adopt it, as I say.